3 days ago, the world watched in disbelief as Japan did something it hasn't done in over half a century. With a move that sent shockwaves through global markets, Japan slammed the United States with 150% tariffs targeting its most sensitive financial sector, banking. Not cars, not steel, not soybeans, banks. This wasn't a policy tweak. It was a thunderous clapback, triggered by escalating threats from President Donald Trump and a collapsing relationship between two longtime allies. What we're seeing is more than just a trade dispute. It's the unraveling of a global economic order, and Japan just lit the fuse. Before we unpack this economic earthquake and what it could mean for your wallet, your job, and the global financial future, make sure you subscribe, like this video, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next chapter in this unfolding global showdown. At the center of all this is America's spiraling debt. The United States is now the most indebted country on the planet. It needs hundreds of billions of dollars every year just to stay afloat. But instead of cutting spending or balancing its books, Washington is leaning hard on its allies, like Japan, to prop up its economy. This means pushing them to keep buying U.S. bonds, accept unfavorable trade deals, and tolerate increasingly aggressive political demands. But Japan has had enough. Trump's administration hasn't exactly taken a soft approach. In fact, Washington's recent messages to Tokyo didn't sound like diplomatic discussions, they sounded like threats. Raise your interest rates, make your goods more expensive, or face consequences. In other words, harm your own economy, or we'll do it for you. This isn't the first time the US has leaned on its allies. But this time, Japan didn't cave. It's fighting back, and its counterattack could shake the very foundation of the US dollar's dominance. Let's look at the backdrop. America is drowning in debt, with a current account deficit of nearly 4% of GDP, about $1 trillion annually. That means the US must constantly attract foreign money just to keep the dollar stable. But trust among foreign investors, including Japan, is wearing thin. Why? Because Washington continues to print money, inflate its debt, and expects the world to keep footing the bill. Japan, once the biggest buyer of US Treasury bonds, is now hesitating. Their trust is breaking down. In fact, a $22 billion 30-year bond sale planned for 2025 already showed major cracks. Fewer foreign buyers stepped in. American institutions had to pick up more of the slack. Central banks across the globe are pulling back from US assets, especially government bonds. And it's not just about bonds. Central banks are diversifying into euros, gold, and even the Chinese yuan. This process, called de-dollarization, is no longer just an idea. It's happening. According to recent surveys, over 85% of central bank managers say that US sanctions and unstable policies are driving them to reduce reliance on the dollar. Now, here comes the real kicker. Trump's proposed stimulus package for 2025 adds another $2.5 trillion to the already bloated deficit. And while Japan has been quietly warning that it can't keep absorbing these shocks, the US keeps turning up the pressure. In its latest report on currency practices, the US Treasury demanded that Japan tighten its monetary policy. Translation: hike interest rates so the yen strengthens, making Japanese goods more expensive and US goods more competitive. It might sound like fair trade on paper, but in reality, it's economic bullying. Japan's economy is already fragile. Its GDP fell by 0.7% in early 2025. Exports dropped, and consumer spending, half of Japan's economy, completely stalled. People aren't buying. Businesses aren't investing. And now, Washington wants Japan to raise rates, which would make borrowing more expensive and crush spending even further. This is where things start to boil over. Take Toyota, Japan's crown jewel. In just 2 months, April and May, it lost over $1.3 billion because of Trump's new 25% tariffs on Japanese cars. The company expects profits to fall by 20% this year. Mazda is in such a financial fog, it didn't even release its forecast. Instead, it blamed trade chaos. So what does Japan do when its biggest industry is under attack and its economy is on the edge? It fights back, with the one thing that will hit America hardest. Instead of retaliating through cars or tech, Japan turned to financial warfare. On July 15, Tokyo shocked the world by announcing 150% tariffs targeting American banking institutions operating in Japan. This move is strategic. It doesn't just sting. It hits where America is vulnerable, its already shaky financial system. Why banking? Because US banks have expanded deep into Asia over the past 2 decades. Japan is a key market. These tariffs mean US banks will lose massive profits, see their assets devalued, and likely pull back operations. JP Morgan, Citibank, Goldman Sachs, they're all exposed. Japanese officials are calling it protective economic sovereignty. But make no mistake. This is a direct response to Trump's aggressive policies and what many in Japan are calling weaponized economics. And Japan isn't bluffing. Finance Minister Bukato hinted at even more drastic steps, like selling off their $1.1 trillion in U.S. Treasury holdings. That's nearly 7% of all U.S. government debt held by foreign countries. A move like that would cause interest rates to spike, crash the dollar's value, and create a global panic on Wall Street. Just the threat alone rattled investors. Bond markets reacted instantly. U.S. yields spiked as fears of a sell-off grew. Japan later clarified no immediate sale is planned, but the message was clear: the bonds are now a bargaining chip. But Japan didn't stop there. Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba, under mounting political pressure with elections looming, called this a battle for national interests. He said Japan will no longer tolerate one-sided pressure and will defend its industries and sovereignty with full force. This all builds on Japan's broader shift away from dependency on the U.S. economy. Tokyo is strengthening ties with other nations. Its exports to countries in the Trans-Pacific Partnership, especially the Middle East, have surged. Japan also signed new trade deals with the UAE and expanded car exports to Canada and Mexico. The message? Japan doesn't need America as much as it used to. Meanwhile, the Bank of Japan is under fire at home. With debt at 236% of GDP and 80% of government bonds owned by the central bank, the BOJ faces a financial cliff. If it raises rates too quickly, under US pressure, it could trigger a collapse in the bond market. In fact, bond yields in Japan have already hit record highs not seen since the 1990s. That might sound good for investors, but it's dangerous. Rising yields mean bond prices fall, and the BOJ could face massive losses on its holdings. Even a temporary spike could spark a crisis. And here's the irony: while Washington is pushing Japan to tighten its monetary policy, many economists inside Japan are urging caution. Reuters reported that 68% of Japanese economists want the BOJ to delay further rate hikes. Consumer spending is too weak. Inflation is being driven by fuel and food, not by a booming economy. Tightening policy now could send Japan into a deeper recession. But Washington doesn't seem to be listening. Inside sources say US-Japan negotiations are breaking down, partly because of infighting among Trump's economic team. Treasury Secretary Scott Bonn, Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, and Trade Rep Jameson Greer reportedly can't agree on a unified strategy. And Japan is growing frustrated. How do you negotiate when your opponent can't even decide what it wants? That frustration is now turning into action. With the 150% tariffs now in place, Japan has drawn a red line. The tariffs aren't just economic retaliation, they are political symbolism. Japan is saying, we will not be bullied, we will not sacrifice our economy to prop up yours, and we will use every tool available to protect our national interests. And the fallout could be massive. US banks are already pressuring Washington to respond. Some are calling for counter-tariffs. Others are begging the Fed to intervene. But there's a limit to what the Fed can do. If Japan starts dumping US bonds, the Fed may be forced to print even more money to buy them up, adding fuel to the inflation fire and further weakening the dollar. The global economy stands at a crossroads. Japan's move is more than a tariff. It's a declaration of independence, from American economic pressure, from Washington's debt dependency, and from the dominance of a system that is starting to crumble.